Good afternoon. My name is Tom Ollendick. I'm a professor of psychology, clinical psychology at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, and director of the Child Study Center. I was asked by ABCT and its staff to create a little interview here of my work, my trajectory as to how I got to where I am now, how it all began. But also I was called a pioneer of ABCT. And I must say, when I got this message, I quickly ran and looked up what it meant to be a pioneer. And I think I'm going to share that with you because I'm going to admit that I'm not truly a pioneer. I may be a quasi-pioneer, but nonetheless, I'm giving it a good go. Well, I looked up pioneer, folks, and it says a person or a group that explores new areas of thought or activity. Well, a new area of thought or activity. To some extent, yes, but to a larger extent, I stand on the shoulders of many, many people in doing what I have been doing over the years. And of course, one cannot begin to acknowledge all of the pioneers, the true pioneers of ABCT, be they Skinner, or Bandura, or Wolpe, or Hans Eysenck, Jack Rackman, Cyril Franks. The list just goes on and on and on. Todd Risley, Monty Wolf, very many people who've been just truly pioneers in getting us off the ground. I say that because my own trajectory has been a long one to behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy. And before saying exactly what that pathway was, I want to say just a little bit about my own personal background. I come from a family of 7 kids. I was born in rural Nebraska. We had no indoor plumbing until I was around 7 or 8 years of age. I had 6 siblings, 4, 5, what is it? No, it's 5 brothers and 1 sister. And my first 3 grades of school were spent in a 1-room schoolhouse. It's true, it's true. The odds of predicting that I would get to my role at ABCT are infinitesimally small. Because I defy all the logic, all the pathways that one usually thinks of in getting to where we are. I hope and believe I have really optimized on that background. I think it has taught me to struggle, to persist, to work hard, and that is probably the key to my evolution. Why psychology? Why psychology? Good question, good question. My answer is a little bit convoluted because when I started in college, a small college in Iowa called Loras College, Dubuque, Iowa, I started out as a theology major. Theology. Then philosophy. Then math. Finally, psychology. I found the subject as a junior, as a 3rd-year student, that I truly liked psychology. At that time, I had really no intention of going on to graduate school. I just enjoyed the subject. And this was, by the way, in the late 60s when I'm going to college. So it's an era in which a lot of things are happening. The Vietnam War, a lot of unrest in the country, and a lot of us were people who were involved in various activities that occurred at that time. But I did stay the course of psychology, and then while a senior in college, I was advised by my major professor there to apply to a couple of graduate schools, which I did. I applied to 2 or 3 in June, by the way, of 1967. And within a week, I had heard from Purdue University that I had been accepted, and I had a full NIMH scholarship to come and study for 4 years. I just said, wow, 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 how can I pass that up? I had, again, in 1967 married, my wife of Mary, now at 50-plus years. But we married at that time, not thinking I was going to go to graduate school, but when I went to graduate school, I was married. We had our first daughter, Lori, when I was a 4th-year doctoral student, and then our other daughter, Katie, a couple of years thereafter. But the main point being that I did go to Purdue. I did train in clinical psychology. Now, clinical psychology at that time, behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy didn't really exist the way it exists these days because you see, at that time, Purdue was primarily eclectic in its orientation and somewhat psychodynamic Carl Rogers was big. Virginia Axline. Freud was really big. So I studied there at Purdue, and then I decided to do a postdoc in 1971, which I did at Devereux. Devereux, for those of you who do not know, is in suburban Philadelphia, and Devereux was a seat of psychodynamic theory at the time, because I wanted to train more in psychodynamic theory, which I did. Well, I did, but while there, I have to say that I was working with children, especially some autistic children at that time, who in my opinion were truly autistic children, the way they used to be in those days. They were all nonverbal. They were all intellectually disabled. They all were doing a number of things, like hitting themselves in the head or biting their lips. One child had bitten his lips completely off. Another one had torn part of his ear off because of just the way in which things were doing. And I was being told to try to be psychodynamic in my approach to those children. It didn't fit for me. It didn't fit. Well, those of you who know the history here know that Ted Ione and Nate Azrin's book, The Token Economy, came out in 1969, but I didn't read it until 1971 when I was on this postdoc, and I said to myself, here's something we can do different. This is something we must do different. And so we did. Without permission, I set up a modified token economy. And you know what? A lot of these kids really responded to it. They really did. However, I recall vividly being chastised by one of my supervisors that you cannot do that with these children. They're expressing themselves. They're showing what they have. They're being themselves. And I thought, well, yes, but they can do better than this. And so I endeavored to set up this token. And then from there on, it kind of evolved from my basic orientation to behavior modification, and then moving into behavior therapy over the years. And then eventually into cognitive behavior therapy. So I'm originally a behavior therapist. My first book, in fact, I'm going to show you here, is called Clinical Behavior Therapy with Children. We published this book, myself and Jerry Cerny, a colleague at the time at Indiana State University where I was, and it was the first book written on behavior therapy with children, authored and written for children. It was published in 1981. And this book is largely influenced by an operant approach, largely by applied behavioral analysis, which are my roots to what I do these days. Over time, though, I did evolve. I did a sabbatical leave in 1978 and 79. And someone the other day told me that was 40 years ago. And I said, no, it can't be. And they said, it was. And I said, okay, it is. It was indeed 40 years ago, but darn, that doesn't seem that long ago. But there I was with Michelle Hurston, past president of ABCT, Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, doing a sabbatical leave, trying to get myself more and more grounded in the behavioral principles. I joined ABCT at around that time. I went on to meet with other people there. Ellen Ballack was there. Also Ellen Kasdan was there at Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic. And then there was an intern there, who subsequently became a president of ABCT. His name is Frank Andrasik. And I remember actually supervising him in 1978-79 while he was on internship at Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic. So the evolution was one that took a little bit of time, but eventually, as my mother once said, eventually, Tommy, eventually you'll see the way. And I think that is what happened. I had to go through, though, the psychodynamic, then, fortunately for me, the applied behavior analytic approach, and then moving into the more behavioral and then cognitive behavioral work. So it's been an exciting career, exciting path. In 1995, by the way, I became president of ABCT. So that was certainly one of the highlights of my career for this organization and my life, was becoming president of ABCT in 1995, which was really a monumental event, working with all of the people, even MJ Eimer. She was there then at the time while I was president of ABCT. So this goes back a while. I don't mean to date MJ, but I am dating myself in this process. But a host of really, really good people who were there. I've been also asked to comment on some of my contributions to behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy. I'm a very modest person, believe it or not. I truly am. But I think I have made an impact in a couple of different significant areas. One of them is in the fear and anxiety area for children and adolescents. In 1983, we published the Fear Survey Schedule for Children, an 80-item measure. It's now been cited many, many times. It's one of my most highest citations that I have. But in any event, I think that work was really instrumental. Then, as we looked at and tried to study exactly what fear and anxiety look like in children and adolescents, we also thought we needed to start to look at how to treat it. And this is where my good friends now, to this day, contributed immensely to my career. Neville King from Australia. He and I did a book together in 1988, actually, on phobias in children, which was really, I think, a seminal book. And in all due gratitude to Neville, he was the senior author on that book. Now retired, in Tasmania. And fortunately, I get to visit him upon occasion. But the main point there is Neville King was extremely instrumental to getting me to think about trials, to think about treatment for these kids. We had to move ahead. And then about the same time, in the 1980s, early 90s, I meet Lars-Göran Ernst from Stockholm. What a chap he is. Talk about a pioneer. Here's a real pioneer, certainly for Europe, and I think for the world, Lars-Göran Ernst. And actually Neville King, a pioneer too, in terms of his influence and impact in Australia. But the main point is that these two people both helped me to get my stuff together, if you will, in terms of how to go about treatments. So indeed, Neville King and I designed several treatment studies early on, in which we began to look at anxiety and fear in children, to see if we could change that. And we used some rather more traditional approaches. We used standard CBT. We did use some bibliotherapy back then. We did use certainly a lot of reinforced practice, operant type strategies. But then Lars-Göran Ernst comes along and he tells me I'm spending too much time doing this stuff. He says, you got to do this one session treatment that he had designed and developed over in Sweden. So indeed, he and I talked, and we talked, and we talked. And if you know Lars-Göran Ernst, you know that he likes to do things quickly. He has one session treatment in 3 hours. He said, we need to stop talking and do something. And so I agreed, and fortunately, we set about submitting a grant to NIH, which we got funded, and were able to treat something like 196 children in Sweden and in the US, and tried out this one session treatment, compared it to kind of a waitlist, but also important from my background to kind of a non-directive therapy, because that's what I had been trained on way back in Purdue days. And I wanted to see how this treatment would do. We called it education support, but it truly was a kind of a supportive condition and non-directive listening. And we tried that out. And perhaps to no surprise, the end of the story is probably evident. We did find one session treatment to be superior to the placebo-like treatment, as we called it, or the non-directive therapy, the education support therapy, certainly to the wait list by all means, almost 3 to 1 compared to the placebo-type treatment. We then followed it up, a number of these children, several years later, up to 4 years later, and we show that as many as 75 to 80% are free of their diagnosis of specific phobia, way out, like 4 years later. So indeed, a significant amount of work had been done there, but we still weren't satisfied, you see, because there were still a number of the kids who were not getting better. And those of you who have children, or grandchildren as I do now, you want your child, your grandchild, to get better. You do not want them to be one who doesn't get better. And yet about 25%, maybe as high as 35%, maybe as high as 40% of children do not get better with these good treatments, even this one session treatment. So we then thought, well, one way we can improve upon this treatment is to include another element to the treatment, which we called augmented parent training. So we brought in the parents, thinking that would help us out with the intervention. And that story, 1 second please. By the way, this cup on the back says, carry on, good person. This is one of my favorite sayings to my colleagues here at the university and my students and other ones I meet. That's a cup that was given by my students, and it has Virginia Tech on this side, so it's really appropriate for this interview. But we did what was called augmented one-session treatment. And we thought for sure, and NIMH thought for sure that this would work better, but it didn't. It worked no better than our standard one-session treatment. So now we're in the midst of trying to discover why that's the case. We're looking at moderators, we're looking at mediators, we're looking at mechanisms. We're really trying to sort this out more and more. Right now, by the way, we are modifying this treatment to work with autistic children. It's going way back to my postdoc days in 1971 at Devereux, to these autistic children who have fears and anxieties. We're just starting the project right now. Began January 1 of this year. This is toward the end of January in 2019 when I'm talking with you. And it just got funded. We have a 2-year project to look at how well this treatment might work for that. So we're trying this one-session treatment with these autistic kids by looking at their sensory sensitivities and some of their repetitive behavioral movements and trying to accommodate those, or address them, I should say, in the treatment that we do. Now, this treatment, just very briefly, reminds me of one that's being done now these days with exercise, in which my very dear friend and colleague here at Virginia Tech, Dick Winnett, has shared with me, whereby you can exercise for about 30 seconds and do that for 3 or 4 times in a row and wait for 3 or 4 hours, do it again, and overall about 1 hour of exercise. Well, it's not even that long, is it? It's about 20 seconds each time, and then another 20 seconds. So 1 minute, 3 20-second episodes is having the same effect as more prolonged exposure. And you know, that always has intrigued me, is because we have accepted blindly that we should be doing outpatient therapy, that we should be doing 1 session a week for 50 minutes. Why? Why do that? We want to see if we can advance our science to move our treatments to be able to address more, just as this physical therapy program is doing. This exercise program, they call it exercise breaks. Isn't that a great notion there? You take a break by exercising, so it's like an exercise break session. In any event, that's a big area. So treatment, assessment, treatment, evidence-based assessment, we've written extensively on that. Diane Chambliss and I published a paper back some years ago now on evidence-based treatments, cited several thousand times, really looking at this. So evidence-based assessment and treatment is just critical. Well, obstacles to treatment, of course. Dissemination, big topic. How to convince therapists to use these exposure-based treatments. We now know that many therapists are as reluctant to use exposure as are patients to receive it. In fact, in some of the studies, patients are more accepting than therapists are. Well, we have some work to do, folks. We need to educate ourselves and our colleagues on that one-session treatment. These exposure-based treatments in particular can be very helpful. We need to get out of our typical office. We need to get out in the community. We need to take our evidence base out there. So the future direction for ABCT for me is really somewhat straightforward, but it's also recognizing our path, our history. To me, history is just extremely important. We've come a long way. We've come a long way, and we've had some terrific foundation that ABCT, the organization, has been extremely instrumental in helping. As I said, I've been fortunate to be president. I've been fortunate to be a member of the directors for a long time, International Associates Chair, World Congresses, et cetera. So ABCT just has a very critical role to work with here and to help us get ourselves beyond where we have been and into the new directions that await us. So I do think we have some of the basis of where we want to go. I do not think we need to throw, as they say, the baby out with the bathwater. Not at all. I think we have very firm, good principles. We have a solid foundation on which to build what we're doing. And I look forward to us moving ahead with these new directions, these new attempts to really make the approach work and to personalize it. So we want to make it as individualized as we can. Not suggesting that any one strategy is going to work for all kids or all adolescents or all adults, but rather how can we target it to a given person. So allow me to thank you for this brief interview. I do hope I've been able to illustrate some of me, my background, my training, directions I've taken, and where I think we want to go, and also my firm support for ABCT. Thank you.